So we're going to do something a little different with this panel that you're probably not used to, but in the tradition of the civil rights movement, those folks that worked hard, some are living, some are gone, we're going to sing. And we encourage you to sing along with us, whatever you're feeling right now, joy, inspiration, sadness, all those things. So I'm going to start out. Now, some of our panelists know how to sing this song, and they're going to come up to the stage right now, help us sing, but it's real easy. The words are easy. You follow them, and I'll give you some hand gestures to help you out, okay? All right? All right, here we go. I forgot the song all of a sudden. No. And it's gone on. You go ahead, grab a mic and do that.
Somebody's hurting my neighbor, and it's
gone on far too long.
And it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. Somebody's hurting my neighbor, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore.
Somebody's hurting our children, and it's gone on far too long.
And it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. Yeah, somebody's hurting my children, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. That's right. That's right.
What a great movie, right? Whew. You know, we want to thank first and foremost, right off the bat, Utah Film Center. Patrick Hubley, Carly Nelson, Davey Davis, and everybody else that helped to get all of you here for this. It was no small task to get this from HBO to air it. They are currently airing it on HBO now, and so it took a lot of work and a lot of negotiating to get HBO to let us do this tonight. So we want to thank HBO too for that, and we want to thank them for funding this kind of documentary. It's unfathomable. So let's talk to you about how this is going to work tonight. We're all so happy to be here. We have a stage full of activists here, organizers here, and I'm going to tell you their names, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves, okay? We're going to start with Monica Dobbins. She's the assistant minister at the First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City. Then we'll go with activist Lesley Shaw. Lesley is with Queers Divest, and she's also with the Utah Poor People's Campaign and has gone to Washington to do some direct action. Or Lesley got themselves arrested as well. So. Then we'll go with Dine Shandiin as well. Dine is a Navajo artist, activist, and organizer for Save Our Sisters, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And finally, Esther Meroño, digital organizer with Repairers of the Breach. And we'll let them introduce themselves. We'll give you our pronouns. I'm Billy Palmer. I'm with RadioActive at KRCL 90.9 FM. Thank you. And my first interaction with the Poor People's Campaign was actually Laura, the host of our show, and I had been seeing the Poor People's Campaign popping up all around us. And we had started reaching out to poor people, asking, is anybody organizing in Utah? We would love to do it. And in the meantime, we were talking to one faction of the national campaign while we had signed on. I actually got a call from Esther, who's here, who has been working with the campaign, the national organization, and asked me, she gave me a call and said, will you go to Washington, D.C. in a few days and do some direct action? I said, absolutely, we've been talking about this for a long time. And when I got there, it was absolutely inspiring. I went with a ton of hope and thinking, is the Poor People's Campaign really going, is it really happening? And when I got there, it was beyond my imagination, the type of organizing, the type of people were living and still fighting for themselves. It was amazing. So I said, absolutely, I'm going to go home and do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try my best to make sure that Utah has a Poor People's Campaign. So to talk to you a little tiny bit about what the Poor People's Campaign is a fusion movement. And where it's a little unique is it's a movement that is looking to change the very narrative of how we talk about poverty, racism, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the nation's distorted morality. And it is led by the voices of those folks most affected by all of these things. So without further ado, I am going to give you, oh, by the way, I go by you can call me he, she, they, them, anything you want. So let me go start with Monica Dobbins.
Well, thanks. I'm Reverend Monica Dobbins. I'm the assistant minister at the First Unitarian Church here in Salt Lake City. And I'm a native of Birmingham, Alabama. Just lived here about a year, just over a year. But I'm pretty new to the ministry. Before I was a minister, I was in restaurant and retail management for 14 years. And so that was my, I think that's my first connection to the Poor People's Campaign, is that I was a bartender, I was a dishwasher, I was a cook, I waited tables, I rang cash registers, and so I was a part of the working poor, and I knew a lot of people in the working poor. And after I started hearing this call to ministry, I really didn't want to lose touch with that. I felt like that the work of addressing poverty is so important, and I felt connected to it. So, right about the time that I started seminary, I was still living in Birmingham, and the Poor People's Campaign came to Birmingham. I was an intern at Greater Birmingham Ministries, which was formed about 50 years ago at the tail end of the civil rights movement to address poverty in Birmingham. And the Poor People's Campaign got its start in Alabama there and in Montgomery, and it was galvanizing. Reverend Dr. William Barber, who is a prominent leader in this movement, came to Birmingham several times. The first time I heard him was in Selma, Alabama, at Tabernacle Baptist, and I mean, he preached the roof down, right? It was so inspiring, and so even now that I've moved to Utah, I've kept my ear to the ground, like, where's that Poor People's Campaign? Because I want to get involved. So that's how I'm connected, and hopefully be more involved soon.
Thank you for that. One thing I forgot to mention is that we do have a call for action tonight. We'll finish with our introductions with Esther. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to there, but I just want to let you know that. Lesley Shaw, please.
Hi, I'm Lesley. I use the pronouns they or them. I'm a little nervous tonight. I spoke at the Women's March, and I could speak in front of 10,000 people, and this intimate room is really intimidating me, so I'm sorry that my voice is probably shaking. Anyway, I've been involved in a myriad of things, most recently Queers Divest, where we asked Utah Pride Center to divest from allowing Wells Fargo and Chase Bank and other entities from marching in their parade as they continue to directly oppress communities of color, queer people, undocumented folks, etc. And through that direct action, I met the wonderful Esther and had the opportunity to go back to DC with Hillary and be a part of relaunching the Poor People's Campaign. It was a really moving experience. I grew up Mormon for 26 years of my life, very Orthodox Mormon. So to walk into that environment where they use a lot of songs and people from all different sorts of faiths come together, at first it was a little hard, but then to be able to sing songs about liberation and justice was very healing. Hillary and I also were arrested when we were back in DC, and then 2 days later, we're marching up to the nation's capital with thousands of other people, and I'll never forget, one of the national organizers kind of pushed me through this crowd of people and said, "We need trans representation," and here I am standing in the middle. Here I am standing in this intimate circle with thousands of people around us, with Reverend Jesse Jackson, William Barber, Liz, so many other wonderful people handing over the demands for the relaunch of the Poor People's Campaign. It was a really moving experience. And after that, less than a month later, we did another direct action with Ice Free Salt Lake, where we locked down in front of Management Training Corporation, which is the third largest private for-profit prison, located in Centerville, Utah, who has a contract with ICE. And, you know, I've never been part of a more intersectional movement than the Poor People's Campaign. And any movement that is being led by the bodies and the voices of folks that are the most oppressed, that need the most centering and amplifying, is a movement that I will always be a part of. And so I hope that a lot of you will join us, because fusion movements are where it's at. So also I don't normally do this, but I just love how much they sing for this campaign. I'm not joking. And when we were locked down at MTC, we were singing another chant that's like never left me. And so I would love if we could sing We Are Not Afraid. And so the first one will be We'll Sing for Liberation, and the second one, Die for Liberation. So if folks are cool with it, hopefully these songs like get you moved just like they moved me. So I'll kind of start it off, and if some of you could help and you could help, that'd be great. So, we are not afraid, we are not afraid, we will sing for liberation, 'cause we know why we are made. We are not afraid, we are not afraid, we will sing for liberation, 'cause we know why we are made. Now we'll die for liberation. We are not afraid, we are not afraid, we will die for liberation, 'cause we know why we were made. We are not afraid, we are not afraid, we will die for liberation, 'cause we know why we were made. Thanks.
Hello. Hi. My name is Esther Meroño of Repairers, and I am a 21st century organizer. Basically what I do is I support grassroots groups and campaigns in building decentralized digital organizing and communications infrastructure and multimedia content across issues. So. And I have a contract with Repairers of the Breach, doing digital organizing communications with them, and they are a national partner of the Poor People's Campaign. Basically, they've just given up all of their staff towards organizing, supporting and organizing the states. And so I was part of the communications team for the 40 Days of Action. And leading up to the 40 Days of Action that just happened with the campaign. One of the things that really got me pumped about the Poor People's Campaign is that it did touch on a lot of, that it was intersectional. And I got politicized by my own undocumented status. I've been in the country for about 25 years, undocumented, and I started organizing the immigrant rights movement when I came out as undocumented, and just often felt tokenized by the nonprofit industrial complex, and also like it wasn't, the campaigns that I was a part of were kind of limiting me to one part of my identity. I also grew up poor, I'm queer, I identify as a woman, and so there were other ways that that I was marginalized, and I found myself at like, you know, when we were doing like caucuses and things like that, at organizing trainings, that I didn't know which groups to go to. Like, should I go with the undocumented folks? Should I go with the white folks? I'm also white. Should I go with the folks organizing around economic status, the queerdos? I don't know. So the Poor People's Campaign, I felt like it was a place where I could be more fully myself, and also I appreciated that it was organizing with a nonviolent principle, though I hope that we will interrogate what nonviolence is a little bit, because I have some problems with the way that this documentary actually talked about that. So hopefully we'll get into that. But yeah, and I'm really excited. I just moved back to Utah from New York, where I've been for the past 5 years doing this kind of work, and I'm just really eager to do some local stuff. I just had a baby, 2-month-old, that's back there with my partner, Lauren. His name is Luca. He's super cute.
He is very
hopefully he
super
doesn't
cute.
disrupt too much, but you know, civil disobedience on a constant basis with this one. But hopefully I kind of got mommy brain, so if I have some brain farts, hopefully you'll forgive me.
We asked Danae to step onto the panel. In speaking with Danae, we thought when we first started even thinking about doing this panel that we have to get somebody from missing and murdered Indigenous women because of the work that they do. And as you saw in the film, when they began to reach out to other people, we so often forget to be led by, that we need to be led by Native American voices as well. So let me give you Danae Shandiin.
Thanks, Billy. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Yate. My name is Danae Shandiin, and I guess I'd like to first recognize this land that we're on. This land belongs to the Paiute, Goshute, Shoshone, and Ute people. So I want to thank them for, it's not, the history of why we are all here today does not come with peace. It comes from a lot of violence and at the sacrifice of these great nations that were stewardesses of this land. So I just want to recognize the land that we share here today. So, like I said, my name is Danae Shandiin. I'm born to the Dine Nation, otherwise known as the Navajo Nation. I am Hanagahni, one who walks around clan, and that is my maternal grandmother's clan. And I'm also Kintlachini, the Red House people, which is my maternal grandfather's clan. I'm also born to the Korean race on my father's side, and my grandpa from my father's side is Bilagana. He's white. So that's the makeup of who I am. I'm an artist here in Salt Lake City, and a lot of my work is centered around my identity as an Indigenous woman, and what it means to live in this world as somebody who has the identity and the makeup of generations behind me who have been a part of this land and the history of this land before anybody else. And so with that, I carry that with me spiritually and strongly. So I make that a part of my work, and a lot of my work is about educating non-Indigenous people about Indigenous issues. And without going into the wide range of struggles that we have today as neighbors to our new guests on this land, I also want to share the beauty of Indigenous people and our intelligence, and how much we can offer the world in a time of climate chaos and madness. I really do believe that Indigenous people have the power to heal where we fall short as a nation. Because we have been here for so long, because we come from nations that took care of the land, and it was a part of their identity, and there was deep-rooted respect and spirituality for that which sustains us. I advocate to bring awareness that the greatest protectors of the land, air, and water are Indigenous people. There are many, many pipelines being built on this continent, and Indigenous people are there. They are protecting all of us. They are thinking generations ahead to ensure that we have healthy drinking water, to ensure that our children have identity with the land, to ensure that we can still grow our ancestral foods. And it's not just for us. We completely realize that we share this land with all of you now. And I think in my healing as an Indigenous person, where I've come from a lot of discontent and anger and sadness, understanding this history and through generational trauma, it's painful. It's painful existing as an Indigenous person, and it's hard to reconcile my relationship with those who deny my existence and deny the history of my people and how it came to be. I know we all live in a very civilized space, but how did that civilization come into fruition? It did not come without violence, and it did not come without the countless massacres and the genocide of Indigenous people. Right now we have, I think, 563 federally recognized tribes by the United States, and I think there are more that have been lost to genocide. So whether I do it successfully through my artwork, that's me, what I care about, and it's what I have to care about. And more recently, I have found myself emerged in the work of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And it's been painful work because I have felt it very deeply. My auntie Priscilla Lee, she was 19 when she was murdered. She had just started her sacred journey as a mother, and she to keep a long story short, it was her, my grandmother, and her 3-month-old baby, Samantha, in the home. And a man came in, attempted to murder my grandmother, and successfully murdered my auntie. And so I grew up with Samantha as my oldest sister, and in that way, she's so precious to me. And throughout my childhood and my younger adult years, this was a story that always haunted me, and I couldn't grapple with the idea of losing my mother to such violence, and for Samantha, a baby, to grow up without her mother. And my family has never received justice. The man was never found. And so these are stories that we don't hear very often. Statistically, the third leading cause of death for Indigenous women, ages 10 to 24, is murder. And 40% of women who have survived human trafficking identify themselves as Indigenous women, and we only make up about 10% of the general population. So this is a reality that is very prominent in the Indigenous community, and it's very, very ignored by the rest of the world. So I guess I'm kind of a student learning about this and the stories. And it's been difficult because I identify with them, and I'm also seeing in relation to poverty, the families that I'm working with that have lost loved ones to this kind of violence. We are already a vulnerable community, and we have been poor since our lands were taken away from us, and since we were put into prisoner of war camps, which are now reservations. You know, there's little infrastructure on res land. A lot of our lands are very, very precious, so big companies like to come in and use our land for resources to fund everyone else that's not us. And those are the only jobs that are offered to Indigenous people, and it's really, really hard to find income. So there's already that problem, and you know, coming as non-Indigenous people, they can come in, predators can come into the reservation, and many people don't know this, but they can come into the reservation, murder somebody, leave, and get away with it because there is no jurisdiction to prosecute that person. And that's one of the big problems concerning missing and murdered. But I wanted to connect it to the actual human experience with missing and murdered, because I'm feeling this a lot with the families that I'm working with. The families that I'm working with, it's been a couple years after their daughter has been murdered, or their daughter has been lost to human and sex trafficking. And the particular families I'm working with, they have left behind babies, just like my auntie left. I don't want to say she left. She left behind was Samantha, and the same goes for these families. They have little babies that are going to grow up without their mothers. And oftentimes the grandparents take on caring for these young ones. And in the midst of the horrors and the heartbreak, there's a severe decline of health that follows. So there are really dire consequences. One, there's lack of justice, but after heartbreak, I'm seeing these families with cancer. I'm seeing these families with severe depression. The siblings of these loved ones, they're depressed. Drug use goes up. Suicide. And the children are suffering from their caretakers' heartbrokenness. And there are no resources. There's no justice. This is a forgotten issue and one that receives zero attention. So I'm really angry about all these things that are happening to people that I really love and care about. And I think that needs to be in the conversation too, because I understand that as Indigenous people, we are the lowest of the low. And when I look at people who care about social issues, when I look at people who run this country, politicians that are running in their campaigns, I look for if they care about Indigenous people. Because we are the lowest of the low, if you care about Indigenous people, that means you care about poor people. That means you care about healthcare, you care about education, you care about immigration, you care about taking care of our guests, our refugees. And I guess that's what, in conclusion, I'd like to advocate for is care about us, because that means that you can care about an array of other things, because it's all connected. All of this stuff is connected, and which is why I really love the Poor People's Campaign, is because it's connecting all these things, these what has been for a long time segregated, all these issues. They're all coming together to make a stronger story that we can kind of comprehend, because we have all experienced this kind of pain.
Thank you. I'd like to, at this point, I told you that we'd have sort of a call to action, and we'd like to talk to you a little bit about where the Poor People's Campaign Utah, our next directors, where we're going. So I will give that to Esther Meroño to start out with.
So we kind of missed the 40 Days of Action, which happened over the summer, which was, that was the launch of the campaign. So we haven't missed anything. I mean, we missed like the launch of the campaign, but Reverend Monica Hall up in Ogden actually did not miss it. She had about 5 people congregate at City Hall up there every week, and kept doing it even though only 5 people showed up every time. So that was awesome. But yeah, essentially during the 40 days, just to kind of update you, folks across about 25 states, I think it was almost 30 actually, they did civil disobedience once a week on their city halls or their state legislatures, and got arrested almost every week in every state. And they had teach-in every week as well, and they had a theomusicology night, a justice and music night, basically. And that was all to towards each week was a different theme, and they connected the themes together, and essentially to show people that these things that are happening to us are institutionalized. Oppression is institutionalized in this country, and that you can't talk about poverty without talking about systemic racism. You can't talk about systemic racism without talking about ecological devastation. You can't talk about ecological devastation without talking about militarism and the military-industrial complex, that all these things are interrelated, and that, in fact, we're all affected by them. And there's this false narrative that, you know, if you're not a person of color, you're not affected by systemic racism. But racism is about power and policy. And so this campaign, a big part of this campaign is in helping to educate the public around that interwoven narrative, so that we can create a new story and actually start working towards structural change rather than just be siloed in our own issues. So, like I said, we're just getting started here because we kind of missed the big push. But the National Organizing Committee is supporting us in getting started here. And that includes building up a state coordinating committee. And like Billy has discussed, this campaign is really prioritizing folks who are directly impacted. Like I said, we're all impacted, but the folks who are really most directly impacted, and also represent different experiences and different parts of the state. So that's kind of what we're working on right now, is building up structure, and then we're hoping to launch into public education campaign and just really support the good work that folks are already doing here in the state in building a shared narrative for systemic change. So, call to action right now is there's a pledge on the website, poorpeoplescampaign.org, and essentially if you go to the website, it tells you a little bit more about the campaign. You can check out some of the videos of the actions that happened during the 40 days. They're really inspiring, and there's some really just incredible organizers all over the country that have been doing just really powerful work. So I would go check that out, and then if you're interested in being part of the Utah campaign, just sign the pledge, and we'll get your information, and we'll be communicating shortly about next steps. And we also are on Facebook and on Twitter, and those are also great ways to see what's happening locally, because we've been sharing some of the local actions like the Queers Divest and the MTC action, as well as Vicky Chavez made a video for us, and that's on there too if you want to hear from her. And yeah, and just if you are also doing something really awesome that fits into the Poor People's Campaign, or want to get more involved with the organizing of the structure, probably the most direct way to reach us is on Facebook at this point. So, yeah.
We want to thank you all for coming. We do have maybe 5 more minutes if anybody has questions. We will need you, if you have questions, to put you on microphone. I can bring one up. I saw your hand up, go up first. Do you mind coming down? And we're actually recording this, so if you have a question, we'd like for you to say it on a microphone. If you cannot make it down to a microphone, please raise your hand and we'll bring one to you, okay? Oh, come all the way up here, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Either way, that's fine with me.
So I think, is this on? Yeah.
Yep.
I think it was Esther that mentioned that you were unhappy with the depiction of nonviolence or the description of nonviolence. And I'm just wondering what you meant by that, and if you could expand on that for a minute and describe for us how you see nonviolence. Thank you.
Go ahead. We have about 6 minutes, so
Okay.
just be advised.
Well, so I won't go into it too much, but I think when I watched this, I felt a little bit. I actually had to look up who the filmmaker was, and then it was a cis white man, and I wasn't surprised because I felt that some of the ways that things are narrated especially towards the end, it felt very biased, and I felt like, you know, it's actually leaving out some of the most radical parts of Dr. King, I felt, because I think that he had a complicated view of violence as well, and it talks a little bit about that earlier in the film, you know, his relationship to Stokely Carmichael. But I think I personally don't consider destruction of property a violent tactic. I suggest after watching this, the documentary Who Streets, and that one is about the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically the murder of Michael Brown. But I felt that film actually has a more nuanced depiction of what nonviolence is and isn't. And I think that it's a matter of strategies. And I think that Dr. King chose nonviolence in the way that he did as a strategic decision, because he used the media as part of his strategy. And, you know, the media is part of the system that we're trying to dismantle, the capitalist system that he started to advocate against. And it's often not on our side, and it doesn't always, you know, it shows, like this film showed, images of riots and looting, oftentimes out of context and using words like ugly and things like that, which I think actually is a very subjective way of depicting that. So.
Go ahead. We got just a couple more minutes.
Billy knows my work. Is anyone from the homeless community involved yet with this organization that you know of?
I think someone reached out to us, but no, not yet.
Okay, I'm just curious, because I can help on that front. Right.
Yep.
Oh yeah, on the national level, yes, not locally.
And then, yes.
So opening up with Dr. Martin Luther King and everything he did for the movement, and just for me, it's my first time ever getting a full grasp of what the Poor People's Campaign fully is as far as the scope. But that being said, and just some of the things that certain people have said, namely the gentleman that asked about representation from the homeless, how important do you feel it is to have representation for African Americans? And, sorry, I'm coming down with something. To have representation for African Americans, not just in general for the campaign, but like even in spaces right here. I personally have done a lot of work for the African American community, shown up for various communities, indigenous women, people of color, et cetera. And it's hard for me because I see a lot of the intersectionality of even anti-Blackness and how a lot of the movements that were founded for African Americans are being taken over and the Black voice is being silenced out. So that to me is a little difficult to sit with. It also makes it hard to show up for other individuals that aren't willing, to acknowledge the oppression that Black people face, but are willing to use the movements that were founded by Black people, Black bloodshed, for their agenda. So with that being said, how can we be more inclusive of not just queer lives, indigenous women lives, Latin American lives, women in general lives? The more women are minority, they get oppressed too. How can we be more inclusive of African American lives, Black lives, African lives? Because the Black Lives Matter movement is alive and well in Utah, and no one from their group showed up tonight, but I don't know if we even knew about it or if they were invited to speak. I'm just trying to figure out ways that we can be more inclusive all around, not just with groups that are present and focused on today, because we get silenced too.
Thank you so much for that. Can I just first say that is so valid, and thank you for that question. As a black person, I've seen so much of that, and it makes me very emotional too. To be very clear, this movement is black. This movement is brown. This movement is LGBTQI+. That means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, all of those things. And we with intention, will not exclude any of that. And you're absolutely correct that we take movements, I hate to say the word, whitewash them a little bit, and then we rinse them out a little bit so that we can say, hey, listen, we're diverse and we're open to people. This movement, I encourage you to go to the website and get more information from there. This very much is led not only by black, but also by indigenous, also by Native American, brown as well. So I encourage you to go to the website, but thank you so much for that question. That is the rest of our time. Is there anything that you would like to say in closing? Make it quick.
In response to you, I want to acknowledge that, even though Indigenous people have been here before your people in a line of violence, I know that the American Indian movement really took upon the teachings and the leadership of the civil rights movement. And that was a really great way for us to have a voice. And I know the origins of those very tactful and very effective and spiritual movements. And I just want to acknowledge that, because that's something that I really pay attention to in my work, is knowing where the need for protest and the need to be heard and the need to experience anger in an effective way, and I know where that comes from. So I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you. Lesley Shaw, let's close with you.
And then real quick, I just wanted to let you know that I think the whole of bringing people together tonight is that they still don't have a Utah committee, and the whole purpose of the Poor People's Campaign is to make sure that those who need the most centering and their voices amplified the most are those that are in the leadership positions. And this, again, is like the most intersectional movement I've ever been a part of, and I'll never be a part of a movement that isn't being led by those that are most affected. So just like what Billy said, we're just getting started here in Utah, and we want everybody to get involved in this, and we are very intentional about who is going to be leading the Utah chapter.
All right, thank you so much for coming.